Thank you, everyone. Was able to get a snack. We are ready to go. I'm going to make a motion to move the rest of public comment to directly after Superintendent Lindberg's presentation on our COVID-19 response and preparedness plan.
Support. Support that.
Motion has been moved and supported. Are there comments or questions? Secretary, should we take a quick roll call vote, please?
Member Jocelyn.
Julie?
You're on mute, Julie.
Yeah, sorry, here.
Okay. Are you in favor of?
Oh, yes.
Okay, thank you. I am a yes. Member Piggott.
Yes.
Member Ristic.
Yes.
Member Sutherland.
Yes.
Member Torres.
Yes.
Thank you.
Excellent. Motion carries 6-0. So for our audience, we know you want to address the board. We want to hear from you, but let's give Superintendent Lindberg and his team some time to give us their presentation. Then we'll get right back to you. So thank you so much for your patience. Superintendent Lindberg.
Thank you. While Kelly gets ready, she's going to pull it up. But let me speak to our board administrators. But let me speak to our community first, just from the heart, from your superintendent. Okay. We're going to get into the planned response and the presentation. I want to assure you that as your superintendent and as your team and on behalf of the board, there is nothing more that we want anymore than to get our kids back in school. We know that that is the best place for them to be. We know that the connections that they'll make with our staff and the learning and the supports and all of those systems are designed, that is the best place for them. And we are eager to do that as soon as we possibly can. And I think as I shared last Thursday, I was pushing forward. We were looking, how do we do the face-to-face? We wanted to make sure our parents had a Waterford Virtual Academy. For those that were, health compromised or whatever the situation was. So I want to share too that still remains open. If you're interested in the Waterford Virtual Academy, that option is still open. We're going to keep that window open a little bit longer. But I also have to be concerned and I have to look out for the health of everyone, not only our almost 8,000 students, but our 1,500 staff members. And so as myself, working with our 27 other Oakland County superintendents, as we had been looking at some of the numbers and some of the school startups and some of the athletics getting back together, there was pause for concern. And so as you can see, the districts around us were beginning to move in that direction. I can tell you, I am not someone who wants to follow. I want to lead. And so that's why even into the beginning of last week, I was working with some more local superintendents and we were sticking to the plan. But as we saw more of the numbers coming up, our staff concerns really growing as we were getting closer to this crunch time, I just couldn't ignore that. And so, look collectively at all of that. So what you're going to see tonight is I'm going to go through the presentation, some of the dates, some of the specific pieces. But what I want to share too is that we've got to get kids back to school as soon as possible and as safely as possible. And I want to make sure that our staff feels that we are listening to them and making sure all of those protocols are in place. Now, two things, and I don't want to make this political. Number one, we have a return to school roadmap. If you look through that, and if you look at the phases that the state has been, documented 1 through 6, we're really around the phase 3.5. So we're really bordering. In fact, many of my colleagues and I have been wondering if the governor was going to move us down, because she has said in multiple articles that I've seen and interviews that she's very concerned about our kids coming back to school. At the same time, I've seen the same thing that many of you have seen. We can't now have a group greater than 10 together. I can't ignore some of these things that have happened. In our schools, even with the Waterford Virtual Academy, we have hundreds over and well over 1,000 at the high school. So we have to look at all of those things. And we don't know what this is going to do. And so just know that my heart is with yours. Our kids need to be in school. My heart breaks that we can't start school The sports, we follow the MHSAA, that may be put on hold. There's a lot of change. But wherever we decide, whatever the board decides tonight, my team and I will implement, and we will move this district forward together. I appreciate your support, but we're going to have to work through this together, and we've got to lift up our kids wherever we're at. This isn't going to go away, so it's going to be all of these protocols that we've put in place will come into play at some point this year. So again, one of the parents had mentioned, we're not talking. Right now, my recommendation was we start the first card marking, the first 10 weeks remotely. And I'm going to talk maybe about pulling that back just a little bit tonight and adding some other pieces in adjustments to some of the parent concerns that we've seen on our emails, our phone messages, and from last week's comments. So let me go through some of this. I'll share some of the thinking that I've got to look at for the staff, the entire district, and bringing kids in. And my team will be able to chime in here at the end if it's needed. So very quickly, I'm just going to go through this. The executive order requires us to put a plan together. That's kind of been the pivotal piece here, and why we're kind of coming up with this pressure point is because by the end of this week, we have to have an approved plan that we will send to the intermediate school district, Oakland Schools, on Friday, and then all of that we send up to the state superintendent next Monday. So of course, as you know, during the last 6 months, not only is a day or two a long time, a lot of things happen, but a couple of weeks. So we'll continue to monitor that. And we certainly will make changes along the way. So we've been working through that. Those are the dates. Kelly, next slide. Last week, we had a committee, the whole meeting, where it's really just to discuss with the board some of the things that are going on. So we had that discussion, and I shared with them my recommendation. Now, if that recommendation is approved as it was stated, we would have everyone remote. We would still do the Waterford Virtual Academy. So those kids that are in that will continue. Those that were going to be face-to-face, we would do online. And I want to assure you that this is not, either option is not going to be like last spring. And I want to commend our teachers. I want to commend our parents and our entire team for what we did last spring. That was by no means our best foot forward, given what we would have liked to have done. But it was no kidding. It was like a fire drill. We didn't know what was going on with this COVID-19. We told teachers, you got to get in, get your stuff out, and be prepared to go. That would not be the case. We've learned a lot from the things we did, things that worked and things that didn't. So let me assure you, not only is the Waterford Virtual Academy going to be much more structured, and we've heard some parents talk about the Ingenuity platform, how that's worked, but also the Google Classroom and working with teachers. I did communicate that last Friday. I wanted to let our community know what I had discussed with the board. And certainly we knew no decision would be made, and that's what we're going to be looking at possibly tonight. I think it's been very helpful for us to hear from a number of stakeholders. I know President Ristich has mentioned that, you know, the concerns, the thoughts, the ideas, and the personal stories, and we appreciate that, and we continue to hear that tonight. On the next slide, these have been my guiding markers. When we've designed this plan, what were we going to do? We knew that following the spring, a plan that was consistent and provided a continuity of learning was going to be most important. We knew that a successful remote learning would be critically important. We had to look at the social distancing, which has been mentioned tonight. We are challenged by that. In this plan, this back to school roadmap, we have recommended areas that we must meet. We have strongly recommended, and then we have recommended. So we certainly are going to meet all the recommended, and we're trying to get into the strongly recommended, but that becomes where social distancing comes to be a part of it. I want to let you know what we've done at 2 levels. We have planned to do block scheduling, as many of you know, at the secondary building to limit movement, where teachers would be coming into the classes where the kids are at. So that would be limiting movement. We'd also limit the movement of the kids at the elementary level. So we're best looking at strategies to limit where kids are coming in contact with one another. Our special education population, very critically important to us, talking about how we can service them. And I'm going to have a couple of things to say about that towards the end of the presentation. Staffing has been critically important. I want to highlight that because I'm going to talk to you about some of the challenges as your superintendent I've had to look at in terms of the realities that have been thrust upon us just here in the last couple of weeks. On the next slide, we know that it's important for students to have consistent face-to-face instruction 5 days per week. That's where it's most successful. And with a teacher, and it also can be achieved through both the in-person and the virtually. We also know that the potential closures and reopening for cases of exposure to COVID-19, and then the reopening, and then again, confirmed cases of COVID will bring a lot of concern. It will throw kids and families off. So that's something we've been considering, and we've been watching in other venues. We know that around this state, there have been many times wherever large groups of people get together, COVID seems to rear its ugly head. And we don't think that will be any different in our schools. We don't know. And we do know, though, that about 60% of our parents and families, students, have chosen the Waterford Virtual Academy. That was our thinking within the last 6-7 weeks of, quite honestly, why we didn't look at a hybrid. I felt for this community, for our Waterford community, it was critically important, and I still believe that is to get our kids back into the buildings, those that want to be there 5 days a week, and that's still the goal. The virtual brings them in, as some people have mentioned, a couple of days a week, half days a week. I can tell you that a number of districts that were going to do that have moved away from that because you have the same contact coming in with our staff, yet you have this break in teaching and learning. So that's best, but I want to push our team to say, how quickly can we get back to face-to-face? And I think we can do that with some of the same numbers when we've got the numbers that we're looking at for the Waterford Virtual Academy. So there's some strategy in looking at those numbers and what the possibilities are. On the next slide, just want to go through a couple of these points. It's very important, everyone, to note that this past spring, that the expectations from the governor on down is that the expectations were not that high. We were trying to deal with compassion, work with the unknown, work with our kids. It was a different expectation. It was a pass-fail rather than specific grades. So let me tell you that we surveyed and we know what went well and what needs to improve. This, whether we start virtually or your students on the Waterford Virtual Academy track, will be very different. And when I've talked with parents, I've encouraged them, don't have your kids choose Waterford Virtual Academy thinking anything it's going to be anything like last spring. And that concerns some parents. We're going to have the supports in place, and the tech folks will be there to support you in a better, stronger way than we did last year or last spring. Teachers have been and will continue to have professional development. We have that planned as we bring teachers back in just about 2 weeks. Teachers will be teaching the board-approved curriculum, and we're going to have to move through that. We're going to have compassion and work with our kids, but it will be different, again, than it was last spring. And I want to say it wasn't just Waterford. Those were the expectations that were given to us from the state level. I want to share, too, the pacing will be consistent with in-person expectations with opportunities for reteaching and intervention. Okay, next slide. Again, I mentioned the social distancing requirements. Those are the realities. You know, somebody did mention something that was true. Originally, we were back in June thinking, how are we going to have 60 or 70 kids on some of our buses? And they were talking about how we would do things, retrofit buses. First of all, state police requirements on inspection of buses. You cannot retrofit them. And so the guidelines came down. And again, I'm not a medical expert, but they said everyone must have a mask on the buses, for example, and we will have hand sanitizer at the front door. I've also had a medical expert tell me, Mr. Superintendent, don't think that everyone's not going to be exposed. When you have that many kids coming by the bus driver, going by teachers, sitting next to one another, we just know that happens. But we're going to do our best because we know it's important to get kids back. Now, again, I'll take you back to the numbers when we're looking at about 60% right now. in our Waterford Virtual Academy, we know that's going to bring the numbers down on our buses. So again, we're thinking strategically on how that might work and to our benefit. Special education, very important. It was mentioned last week heavily, and then also tonight on the next slide, Kelly. So the Student Support Services Department will continue to work with parents as vital IEP team members to review student plans and to determine how best to deliver services under the district's preparedness response plan. So these are 3 bullets that I want to point out for some of our parents. Staff will contact parents to discuss their child's individual education plan as well as their contingency plan for remote learning. While student health and safety is paramount, student learning must continue and will look different for each student as required by our IEP planning process, and that's been brought up tonight. Here's a key that we're going to make sure that we put in place. Ancillary service providers such as physical and occupational therapists, speech and language pathologists, and school social workers will work with special education team members and parents to work with students in achieving their goals. We're going to look at different ways to do that, and I'm going to share a little bit of thinking here at the end. We're getting very close. I want to share with the board a little bit of just staffing realities, some of the things that we need to look at. We've got a fantastic teaching staff and staff throughout the district. They are ready to come back. They want to do it safely, but here are the realities. 469 of our 552 Waterford School District teachers live in Oakland County. We have 18 or 20 or 22 districts now that have confirmed that they're going to start remotely. Those teachers who have school-age children will be faced with caring for their children. Their school districts are not returning to in-person learning. Now, right now you're thinking, I have an 11-year-old, I do, and many of you have kids. We'll have to deal with it, and I understand that. But now I want to go to the next slide, and this is one of the realities that we have to work with. Waterford School District teachers have the option to take a 1-year unpaid personal leave, and again, school starts in 3 weeks. They can apply for an Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act. There are the initials, or another one of the acts here, the Families First, the Coronavirus Response Act, for up to 12 weeks of job-protected leave. Qualifying reasons are below the related to COVID-19. These are federal guidelines. They can apply for an FMLA leave for up to 12 weeks with required physician documentation if they're compromised health-wise in any way. This is federal, but something we need to think about. Employees taking leave shall be paid at 2/3 of their regular rate or 2/3 the applicable minimum wage. It goes through, but if some of our teachers do not have care for their kids or they have health compromised folks at home, they can take this leave, and we have to give this to them. And there is a cost to the district, which is on the next slide. Why am I sharing this with you? I'm sharing this with you because this is very important to know that I've looked at this as your superintendent. Depending on what we could have, I mean, this could cost $1 million, $2 million. Now, do we think that many teachers will take leave? No. But we're not in a spot where we can be spending money on people taking leaves. At the same time, we've got to bring in and hire substitutes. And we know that at this time, that was short last spring. We know this year that there are going to be fewer wanting to come into the classrooms. These are just the realities that we're dealing with. You've hired me, I've hired the team to deal with this, and we will. But these are the realities we've been working through. I want to share just with you a couple of things. By August 21st, we must do some posting. We need to interview and get the right staff members for the Waterford Virtual Academy. We're going to receive and process those requests, personal leaves. That's once a decision's made. Many of our staff members will make decisions on what they need to do. And then, of course, we will be assigning the remaining teachers to those classes, either that are happening starting remotely in all of our buildings or in person. So with that, a couple of things that I would propose to the board that we look at as possible amendments to my recommendation last week. I call this the phase-in back to school face-to-face approach. Okay, phasing it in. One, I would recommend that we would agree that we would reevaluate and good teaching always monitors and evaluates every single day, and we would continue to do that. But that we would reevaluate if we were to start remotely at the 5-week point, which is October 2nd. Now, we're not going to wait till October 2nd. We would be evaluating the numbers. Quite frankly, we would be evaluating other schools in the state, in the county, if they're open to in-person teaching, and also outside of the state about what's going on with this COVID-19. I've talked with the team today about setting up some type of learning labs where we meet the needs of our at-risk students and students that need additional support. And that would mean that there would be some in school. It would not be for a full day. I don't have the details on that because I think it's very important that I work with Mary Crate, that we work with our administrative teams and what that could look like. But what I'm showing you is that we want to transition into very safely, but very thoughtfully, very strategically, how do we get our staff and kids back into school safely? So reevaluate at the 5-week mark, learning labs, and I had mentioned the special ed services. We heard last week that some of these ancillary services have to happen. It will be different than what we did in the spring. That I'm going to commend to you that we will do that. I've talked with and worked with our executive director, Nadine Malostan. We've been talking about that since the board meeting last Thursday, and we would be working to provide those needed services for our students. So those are some of the things that I recommend. It'll be disappointing to some. I'm still recommending that we do a slow approach. I would like nothing more than to say we're ready to go. We're going to open the 31st. But as your superintendent, I'm very strongly suggesting that we do it a slow roll, a phase and approach, so we can do it thoughtfully and get it done right. And I could share some things on the requirements. Let me give you an example. If Mott High School, where we would, outside of the virtual academy, have 800 or 900 kids coming, if there is one case of COVID, we need to shut the school down. We need to talk about quarantining for 14 days. We need to work with our health department. Our health department, as every institution, has been overloaded. But we would work with them about how we're going to do the tracing and what we have to shut down. So we do believe that that would happen, and our kids may fare well according to the data. Some of our staff members may not, but I think we just need to know more. What I'm hearing from our leaders in Lansing, they're concerned. They haven't rolled us back. I have no word that they're going to do that. But we are teetering. If you look at between phases 3 and 4, we are teetering between those two phases. And that is the challenge that I am having as your superintendent, and I know the board has been really challenged with, and so many of our educational colleagues across the county. And that is our challenge tonight. But we are here to serve Waterford. We're going to do what is best for Waterford, and I'm open for questions. The team's here as well, board members, and we're open for any questions you might have.
Colleagues, let's, what questions do we have for Superintendent Lindberg and his team? Yeah, Member Torres. John Paul, you're muted.
All right, Scott, so if we go into phase 3, as you're mentioning, we're closer to a phase 3 right now, everything becomes moot, correct? School shut down, and all of this it goes out the window because we have to shut down per the state, correct?
That's right.
But we're in phase 4 right now.
That is correct.
So now you talked about the learning labs, and I know it's very preliminary, but what would that, if you could elaborate just a little bit more on what that would look like, so that would meet some of the needs for specific populations of parents, some of which we heard from tonight, with circumstances where they're unable to teach in home because of work requirements and things like that. Is that what that would gear towards?
I think the learning labs would be more of a shorter, so it couldn't be for all day, keeping the kids in there all day. We'd have to look at that. I'd want the teachers to be involved in that. I'd want to put a structure together around that so teachers know as we begin school to see how we can bring some of them in. Quite honestly, I would expect some teachers would be more comfortable with that than others, but we would set up guidelines and expectations through that. Part of my thinking is, quite honestly, is to start to normalize getting back into the school building for our staff and some of our students. So I think that would be at a quite a small scale. We're just beginning to talk about that. I won't even ask Lisa to chime in because really we've just started kicking that around. It wouldn't be fair to do that. But again, my idea is to start this slow phase and in getting people back together. And we wouldn't want to have it, but if we had some type of a COVID issue, it's a much smaller controlled population that we can look at.
And another question, Scott. So some of the other school districts are doing the hybrid version, and I know that's not something that we necessarily explored, but I know West Bloomfield originally had a version, and now the version that seemed to be going into is that they're doing 4 half days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday's a cleaning day, and then Thursday, Friday. Smaller populations, and they also have virtual academy available, which lowers the population of students. That is not something that you're recommending, though. That's not something that, why is that, does that not fit for Waterford?
I'm seeing we need to get back to the 5 days. I think our kids need to support 5 days a week. I'm concerned about the consistency, the lack of consistency in the half days. And I know there was another district going to go 2 days or 2.5 days. The other thing for our staff is our staff still coming in contact with all of these different kids. So it wasn't a direction that I thought we should go. I was always focused on the face-to-face and the virtual, and that's still where I think is best. That's kind of what the team had talked about in terms of that. The Waterford virtual account, or the hybrid is to me, well, I know there's other districts. I just don't think it gets the job done. It might feel a little bit better, but I don't think it gets the job done that we need. And I'm hopeful that we're going to get back with these kids that have wanted to be face-to-face much sooner than later. So the virtual or the hybrid would not really work out as well in that situation.
And then the last question. So you're proposing a 5 weeks we go back and revisit as opposed to the 10-week. But what we would do is look at the trends in other school districts, look at the cases of COVID in Oakland County or locally, and then assess where we could go from there. Would it be potentially transitioning more into the classroom, or just sticking with a remote? But it would be a 5 week instead of 10-week.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Scott, would we have to, it's my understanding, we'd vote to adopt the 10-week schedule and then like at our meeting at the 5-week mark, then revisit that?
We could decide tonight to amend my recommendation to 5 weeks and say that's the plan. We could communicate that out, and we would be watching that. My understanding from MASB and their legal is that either you can have me make those changes, or we would come back to the board to make the change, and it would need to be voted on. But I believe that is up to us, certainly.
And I know that Rochester's doing that. They're doing that 5 week. So there is a district that's doing it and is going to gauge numbers as they move forward.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Just a couple quick questions. How do parents, I heard several parents both in our Thursday regular meeting and tonight's meeting talking about the desire to have the virtual academy, even though they hadn't chosen that because they thought that they would be able to go face-to-face. If we vote to go virtual, can you help our families understand what they would need to do so that they can go in and make that selection?
Yes, we would communicate that first thing tomorrow morning. I'd work with the team. We know that that's still open, so that has never closed. But yes, Joan, we would make sure that that's open because things have changed. Some parents' families may want to choose that.
Thank you. And then just relative to the 5 week mark, I know that we've had some discussion. We've had numerous phone calls and conversations, and I personally like the idea of having a 5 week window at this point so that we can learn as much as we can, assess where the educational environments have gone. 5 weeks does give us enough time to look at other districts that are live and see if there are, spiking numbers or there was some very disturbing news even just this morning with 100,000 cases in children that has occurred between, I think it was July 15th and July 31st, which accounts for fully 40% of all of the cases in children up to the age of 17 or 19, depending on how they categorize them. But up to 40% of that, that's 40% of all cases since the start of the pandemic have occurred in the last 2 weeks. Very alarming. And I think 5 weeks gives us a chance to kind of put our thumb in the air and say, where are we at from a data perspective, and what is the national and state and local outlook look like? So I appreciate the 5 week touch point very much.
Thank you.
Julie, Member Johnson?
Yeah. The learning labs and the ancillary services, I know that those are all like in the beginning parts, but would those be very soon after we started school? Or like within a couple of weeks? Or because it's hard to have that once kids start to get behind.
Right.
So is that something that we're looking at immediately?
Yeah, I think if you're talking about the general ed population, we know that assessments are going to need to be taken. I don't know what the timeline is on that, but I think it's required within the first 30 days. I think that's something we're going to want to do sooner. I don't know if Lisa wants to speak to that at all, but I know Nadine was getting ready. We should be ready to put these services into place as soon as we possibly can. I know our teams will not want to wait for that. Does that answer your question, Julie?
Yeah, I just want to make sure. I mean, because, thank goodness don't have kids that have special needs, but that really tore at my heart on Thursday. And we need to do something, even if they're little baby groups of 5 kids or just a couple days a week or something,
Right.
And the kids at Kingsley Montgomery, even 1 day a week is better than nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So I really would like to do that. And Joan, you know what? I agree with you. I've been saying this all along. I really struggle with the data that they have on kids because most kids have been sheltering in place since March. So that data really bothers me, and I'm really worried about sending some of these kids back to school, especially the ones that have asthma or, other things that are going on in the school. And I just don't want to send the kids back too soon and just have all out. So, but I'm glad that you guys went back and looked at the learning labs and the ancillary services. It makes me very happy. So that's all I got.
On that same note, if we could, on those two, especially the learning labs and the ancillary services, is it possible that we could add that as an agenda item for our next regular meeting, just to get some more detail and structure around those thoughts? I know that these are, things that it's a constantly changing environment, but it would be really helpful, I think, for all of us to get some visibility to what that will look like, as well as for our families.
Yes, I agree. And that's, I was already thinking that. And heck,
Great.
we've got a lot of time. That's a week from Thursday.
Yeah, all kinds of time.
That's a longer time than we've been dealing with. So yes.
Thank you.
I can speak to that a little bit. I do know that in Monroe and Ferndale, they've offered these learning labs. And I know that in Ferndale, and I'm not going to get this right, but close enough, parents and students have the option, certain, like let's say half the students have the option of going to their gym during a half day block, and they'll be socially distanced with a device. And there'll be teachers and paras there. There'll be support staff so that students can be in the school. It's a slow roll into the school. They can have their devices. They can have some guidance from their teachers and paras. And then on another day, let's say half of your students would then be eligible to come in the morning or the afternoon, a half day block to complete some work. So it's welcoming students back into school. It's making sure they're setting up their systems and getting the protocols in place, and hopefully, on our path back to face-to-face. At least that's the presentation that I read.
Yeah, one thing I would say is I want to make sure we design this with our teams. I don't know what that will look like. We might start a little slower, but we'll design it with the team. Certainly, I want our principals involved in that, and quite honestly, we may look at redeploying some other staff to do some of that. So those are some of the quick ideas that we were discussing just today.
Member Pickett?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. If we do end up voting tonight and we do approve your recommendation, Scott, I do like the idea of revisiting this at 5 weeks, but I also think, and I think you attributed to it, and for people listening, this is going to be looked at on a daily basis, I would hope, by our administration team and our teachers. And we have 2 board meetings in September, right after school starts. And I would hope that we don't wait for 5 weeks to revisit it. We look at it at each board meeting in September, and we hear how it's going. We look at other school districts that maybe have gone face-to-face, how they're doing. If things are bad, so we can correct. And I encourage parents and staff that to reach out to you and our administration team, or speak out at a board meeting. I mean, don't hold it in. I've always said, if you don't speak up, if you have issues, it can't be fixed. So don't be afraid to come to a board meeting or send an email to your teacher or your principal of your school, or to our superintendent, or to board members, and let us know if things aren't working and how it can be better, or if things are working. Because I think it needs to be looked at literally on a daily basis, or weekly. And when you say 5 weeks, I like that better than 10 weeks. But I also think we need to let people know it's not just going to be 5 weeks and then we're going to look at it. It's going to be literally being looked at every single day to, correct things that might not be going good. And again, this is if it goes that way. So I want to point that out. And then the other question I know a few people asked tonight again, and we did talk about it a little bit last Thursday, is the devices that we have. And I know we bought quite a few, but I also know there were, and I think somebody attributed to it tonight, and I've heard from some people that when the survey was initially done, they thought, all right, we're going to be in this for a few weeks, a month, we can get by. But now that, we're going into it and we're going to go hardcore, really education by remote, there's a lot of people that need devices because they have multiple kids in their house, 3-4 kids. Can you just kind of go over that, or is that a Darren question again, we can kind of let people know how that works?
Sure, and we've been talking about that. I know I'm going to bring Darren on. We've got some devices in the buildings that we will redeploy, but we've got some options. Darren, you might want to give us a little update on what those numbers are looking like right now.
Yeah, we're still within a good window of what we have ordered. I am daily getting requests in. I know the board, as you get requests, you're forwarding those on to me. I add them to my distribution spreadsheet. If we know that people need devices, I will continue to add them to the list. If we end up running out of the new devices, we have a plan to look at devices that are in buildings to see if we can distribute them. But right now, like I said, we're within a window of the devices that we purchased.
Thank you.
Colleagues, I want to ask a quick question about gather your thinking on this. It seems to me it might be advisable, or I could be wrong here, to make a motion to, well, how do I phrase this? We might consider rolling back the overall time span of a fully virtual return, with the expectation that we do revisit it at 5 weeks. And here's what I mean. We might say that let's plan for 8, but revisit at 5. In part, because if that would at least give people enough time to plan, and because if we do get to that 5-week mark and something's happening and we can't get there, or we're short resources, then we might be in a little bit of a pickle. So I'm wondering, I'm asking more than anything, what are your thoughts on that? Because a hard 5 weeks deadline, if things are looking weird, we might be in a tough spot.
I feel like the 5 weeks is, if we're continuously looking at it, we should have a good picture of where we're at. I feel like we'll know what's coming, and by the time we get to the 5 weeks, we would extend it at that point. I think part of what the 5 weeks does, it falls in line with what some of the other school districts are doing. It gives us time to assess what's happening in these other school districts here in Oakland County, and it gives parents hope. You know, I got a 6-year-old right now, and I've shared the story with many people. She's energetic. You know, I did the online learning and the learning packets just like everybody else. You know, I was part of the group that was going to send my daughter back, you know, in class. I have been looking at all the data, and it was a tough decision, just like so many other parents were saying. I think if we put the 5 weeks on it, we're continuously assessing and we're looking. I think once we get to that 5 weeks, we'll know coming in. And obviously, if the situation is bad, you know, we'll kick it back again. You know, I think the overall view is that, you know, like Scott said, we eventually want to be able to get back in that classroom, we get back in that building. You know, I'm liking what I'm hearing about the learning communities. You know, and I think that could be helpful because there are a lot of parents that we heard from tonight, you know, who are in that situation where schooling is not going to be an option because they have to work, you know, and I'm in the same boat with my wife and I both working and trying to, you know, teach a coming in first grader. So I think that, you know, this is an opportunity where parents can at least get something, and we're looking at, you know, trying to still keep everybody safe, you know, and we're looking at all of the data continuously so that, you know, once we come to 5 weeks, we'll have a good look at where we're at.
I think what you might have been referring to is we need a decision point, but we also need so if the decision point is at 5 weeks, we would still need some reaction time to implement, communicate, and set that in motion. So I do think there should be some difference between the decision point and the implementation date, so that our parents and our staff and faculty can all, you know, be in a place where they can respond. So I know you mentioned a 5 week decision point with an 8 week, you know, we would look at it at 5 weeks, and then at 8 weeks, it might be when we implement. So that's 3 weeks in between. You know, I'm open to hearing what other board members are thinking relative to timing, and our administrators as well, because they're going to need a chance to react as well. So,
Member Patricia?
The 5 weeks, again, I don't know exactly what date it would fall on, but is that something that would come up under our normal board meeting? Or would we have to have a special one, or is this something the administration would make a recommendation to us, say, hey, it's looking good. At the next board meeting, we're going to make this adjustment or that adjustment. I asked the 5 weeks, could we align it with a board meeting? Megan would have better information on that, looking at a calendar. So I don't know if that might just fall like at our second board meeting in September. If again, that wouldn't be a 5 week period, maybe be the first one in October. I don't know, but something along them lines. But again, we definitely need where are we, and now we will implement it, and it takes a little bit of time for that. So I agree with the rest of the board on that. I'm just looking for a time. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just looking for a time so it would flow into our regular board meeting, so we don't have to have a special meeting to disrupt it somewhat.
Mike, can I just make a quick recommendation? And I know we're going on 4 hours, and I know there's a lot of people. I mean, we're almost 900 people still here, and they're anxiously waiting to vote. But I almost feel guilty that we're really starting to chat more and deliberate. And I think we have still quite a few people that want to speak. And I think it would be in our best interest to let's kind of quit talking. You know, we heard Scott's presentation. Let's go back and let the community speak, just so we've heard each and every one of them, and we've given them their time to speak before we really deliberate too much more.
I would support that.
Okay. Julie, you're muted. You're okay? with-
I know, I keep doing that. I just have a quick thing. Somebody had asked me about a device, and I'm like, well, just go on the website, and they couldn't find it. So then I went on the website. Then I texted Kelly, so I interrupted her vacation, and she told me to have them email Darren. Is that what we want people to do? Should we give out Darren's email, or should we give somebody else's? How about it, Darren?
I'll take them however they get to me.
Okay.
When people
can
are
you give
calling
everybody-
buildings, they send it to me right now. So
Okay, can you give your email address just
Yes,
for
sir.
people listening?
do you want me to put it on the chat?
Sure.
It's HOLLED01 at WSDMI.org, and I'll put it in the chat.
Thanks,
If I could
Darren.
I just want to make sure we level set expectations. I think we have a huge audience out there. We do not have a device for every single student in our district, not even close to it. And they're very, very difficult to get your hands on right now because of the massive demand as a result of the pandemic. So I want to make sure that when we talk about these devices, that there is a true and genuine need and not a want. We want to make sure that we're meeting the needs, but we definitely cannot, we do not have the wherewithal to provide a device to every student. So I just want to make sure that we're level setting expectations for our community, that, you know, there are just not enough devices out there that meet the needs of our security and our framework needs and available to us as a school district. So that's all I want to say.
Yeah, and thanks for that, Joan. And I will tell you that most parents that I've spoke with have been very, cognizant of their requests, and I appreciate that. So yes, we ask that people only ask for what they need, and we will do our very best to fulfill that.
Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, let me summarize here really quick. So the superintendent has proposed a modified proposal here that we start the year fully online for some determined amount of time. And that's an open question for us because there does have to be some lead out time. If we say 5 weeks is decision time, there does need to be time to adjust, prepare. That plan has been, the additions include the creation or establishment of some sort of learning lab, learning pod. The shape of that is to be determined, but what that will do is it will help to welcome students back into school. It will provide support for students who need it. We're also going forward with the understanding that our ancillary services for our students who need them, we will be meeting those goals. And again, the shape of these we're going to be working on. And finally, with the understanding that we're going to be monitoring, adapting, and reevaluating as we go. So I just wanted to be clear on that. Some of these have a little bit more meat on the bones, but I want to summarize that before we open it back up to audience comment. Board members, anything else before we do open it back up to audience comment? Okay, so again, talking about our modified return to school plan. We're going to return fully virtual for some determined amount of time, but whatever that's going to be, it's going to be a 5-week reevaluation. We've got learning labs or learning hubs, or we're going to be meeting the needs of our ancillary services and focus on adapting. So, okay, board, we're going to take a back seat here, and we're going to invite some of our friends back in.
President Ristich, I'm sensing that Nadine may want to say, do you want to say anything on the ancillary services, Nadine? I want to make sure that we don't, I'd like to under promise, over deliver.